History is a set of lies agreed upon. You've heard the name Martin Luther King Jr. since kindergarten. You've seen grainy footage of the March on Washington and know the story of Rosa Parks, the quiet, tired seamstress who refused to give up her seat in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955. It's a beautiful, clean story of defiance, changing the world. But what if the official version is a polished edit? What if the spark that ignited the civil rights movement didn't start with a middle-aged woman in December? To understand the real secret, we go back 9 months earlier, to March 2nd, 1955, to a city suffocating under segregation, where 15-year-old Claudette Colvin was about to change everything. In 1955, Montgomery was a psychological minefield. Jim Crow laws were a constant threat of violence. For a black person, the bus was the most frequent place of humiliation. Pay it front, re-enter it back. If the white section filled the driver, with police authority, could order you to stand. This was Claudette Colvin's world, a bright teenager studying the Constitution in school, learning about Patrick Henry and give me liberty or give me death. Those words were fire in her blood. Claudette boarded the Highland Gardens bus, headed home from Booker T. Washington High School. She sat in the middle section. As the bus crawled, more white passengers boarded. The driver, Robert W. Clear, looked in his rearview mirror and barked, "Give up those seats." 3 other black students got up, but Claudette stayed. A magical power pinned her to the seat. When the driver approached, she didn't look down. She said, "It's my constitutional right to sit here. I paid my fare." The bus screeched to a halt. Police were called. 2 officers, Thomas J. Ward and Paul Headley, boarded. They saw a threat to social order. They dragged the 15-year-old girl off, her schoolbook scattering across the floor, kicking and shoving her into a squad car, hurling insults. She was handcuffed. The first time a black person was arrested for violating segregation laws in Montgomery. This is where the untold part gets dark. After her arrest, black leadership met in secret, including a young, unknown preacher, Martin Luther King Jr., an activist, E.D. Nixon. They sought a test case to challenge bus laws. Claudette was perfect, brave, first, defiant. But then, the leadership blinked. They looked at Claudette and saw a problem. She was 15, from a lower-income neighborhood. Shortly after, it was discovered she was pregnant by a married man. In 1950s South, this was problematic. Leaders feared white media would tear her apart. The message of justice would be lost. So, they made a cold, calculated, secret executive decision. They would wait. They needed someone beyond reproach. Someone who looked like middle-class dignity. Someone calm, married, with a history of community service. That person was Rosa Parks. Rosa wasn't just a random passenger. She was the secretary of the local NAACP. She was a mentor to Claudette Colvin. Rosa Parks had spent months training for this moment. When Rosa refused to move 9 months later, it wasn't spontaneous. It was a political maneuver. The secret of the Civil Rights movement. It was manufactured for TV. Leaders knew to win white Northerners' hearts. They needed a perfect victim. Claudette Colvin was too real, too raw, too messy for the cameras of 1955. For decades, Claudette's name was scrubbed from the narrative. She was told to stay quiet. She watched from the sidelines as Rosa Parks became a global icon. She watched as the bus boycott she helped spark turned Dr. King into a legend. But here's the secret most people miss. When the legal battle made it to the Supreme Court in Browder v. Gale, it wasn't Rosa Parks' name on the lawsuit. Rosa's case was tied up in state courts. It was Claudette Colvin and 3 other women. They served as plaintiffs. Claudette's testimony legally ended segregation on buses in America. She won the legal war, but she lost her place in the history books. Why this matters today? Who else have we erased because they didn't fit the brand? The movement wasn't just "I have a dream" speeches. It was a gritty, high-stakes game, where heroes were chosen and others were hidden in the shadows. Claudette Colvin didn't get a statue for 60 years. She didn't get the headlines. But without that 15-year-old girl's scream of "It's my constitutional right," the dream might never have started. We are peeling back the curtain. This isn't the history you were taught in school. This is the truth about how the world actually changes. If you look at the iconic photos of the Civil Rights Movement, you see men in suits and women in Sunday dresses. But if you look closer at the men standing on the perimeter, the men driving the cars, the men organizing the scouts, you're looking at soldiers. The greatest secret of the American 1950s is that the civil rights movement was effectively imported from battlefields. This was the Double V campaign: victory over Hitler abroad and victory over Jim Crow at home. The great paradox of 1945. Imagine being a black soldier in 1944. You are drafted into a segregated army. You are told you are fighting for the four freedoms. You storm the beaches of Normandy or fly Mustangs over the Rhine. In France and England, you are treated with more respect by Europeans than you ever were by your neighbors in Mississippi. For the first time in your life, you breathe the air of equality. Then, the war ends. You come home. You're wearing a chest full of medals, a uniform that represents the greatest democracy on earth. And as you step off the train in Georgia, a white man tells you to get to the back of the line. This was the spark of rage. Thousands of black veterans returned to a country that wanted them to go back to being subservient. But these men had changed. They had seen the world. They knew how to strip a rifle, how to organize a platoon, and most importantly, they no longer feared the authority of a local sheriff. The mutiny at Freeman Field, the secret prelude. Before the sit-ins of the 1960s, there was the Freeman Field Mutiny of 1945. This is a story the military tried to bury for decades. The Tuskegee Airmen, the legendary Red Tails, were the elite. But at Freeman Field in Indiana, Colonel Robert Selway created a hidden segregation system. He designated one officers' club for trainees all black and another for instructors all white. On April 5, 1945, black officers began a systematic invasion of the white club. They didn't use guns. They used their status as officers. In groups of 3 and 4, they walked past guards, demanding entry. Over 2 days, 61 officers were arrested. Then, when ordered to sign a statement agreeing to the segregation, 101 black officers refused. This was a secret mutiny. During a global war, these men risked execution for insubordination during wartime. Why? Why? Because they realized that if they didn't fight for their own dignity on a US base, their sacrifice in the sky meant nothing. This event was the blueprint for the nonviolent resistance that would define the next 20 years, the tactical brains, Medgar Evers, and the veterans. We often think of activists as protesters, but men like Medgar Evers were tactical operatives. Evers was a veteran of the Battle of Normandy. When he returned to Mississippi, he didn't just give speeches. He applied military intelligence to the movement. Evers and other veterans created a secret underground railroad for information. They used their military training to conduct surveillance on the KKK. They knew how to spot a tail, how to use coded language on the phone, and how to secure a perimeter around a church meeting. In the 1950s, the NAACP was banned in many southern states. It was effectively an illegal insurgency. Veterans used their GI Bill money to buy property that served as safe houses. They turned their homes into When Dr. King came to town, it wasn't the police protecting him, it was a secret detail of veterans, often armed, sitting in the shadows of the porch, ensuring that the nonviolent leader stayed alive to give his next speech. The Deacons for Defense, the armed secret. Here is a secret that many history books feel uncomfortable sharing. The nonviolent movement survived only because it was backed by armed protection. In 1964, a group of black veterans in Louisiana formed the Deacons for Defense and Justice. They were mostly World War II and Korean War vets. They realized that when the KKK rode through black neighborhoods at night, the police would often lead the parade. The Deacons didn't want to start a war. They wanted to end the reign of terror. They bought walkie-talkies and set up a sophisticated patrol system. When Dr. King or Corps activists held marches, the Deacons would park their cars along the route, trunks cracked open with shotguns inside. Their secret motto was, "We will be nonviolent with the nonviolent, but we will be real with the violent." This presence changed the math for the KKK. For decades, the Klan had operated with zero risk. Now, they knew that if they attacked a march, they would be met with disciplined, military-grade return fire. This secret deterrence is what actually kept the death toll of the civil rights movement from being 10 times higher. The strategy of the GI Bill The secret weapon of the movement wasn't just guns, it was economics. The GI Bill provided black veterans with education and home loans. This created a new middle class of black families who didn't rely on white employers for their survival. When you don't have a white boss who can fire you for voting, you become dangerous to the system. These veterans became the primary donors for the movement. They funded the bail money. They bought the buses, Te Were, logistics command of the revolution, the global eye. Finally, the secret pressure of the WV campaign was international. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union used American racism as a propaganda tool. They would tell African and Asian nations, "Why join the Americans? Look how they treat their own soldiers." Black veterans knew this. They began writing letters to international newspapers. They turned their domestic struggle into a foreign policy crisis for the US government. They forced the hand of presidents like Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower, not just by appealing to their hearts, but by threatening the prestige of the United States on the world stage. The legacy of the Civil Rights Movement was not a lucky accident of history. It was a planned, tactical offensive led by men who had survived the beaches of Iwo Jima and the forests of the Ardennes. They took the discipline of the army and the hardware of the veteran and turned it into a machine for justice. When we see the I Have a Dream speech, we must remember that standing in that crowd were thousands of men who had spent their youth in foxholes so that they could one day stand on that mall as free citizens. The secret to their success: they stopped asking for permission to be American. They had already paid the price in blood. If the Civil Rights Movement were a blockbuster movie, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would be the leading man. The March on Washington would be the climactic scene. But every great production has a director, someone behind the camera, pulling the strings, managing the lights, and script-writing the dialogue. For the American Civil Rights Movement, that director was Bayard Rustin. Yet, for decades, his name was a secret whispered only in the halls of activism. He was the man who taught the movement how to move, yet he was forbidden from standing in the spotlight. To understand Rustin is to understand the intellectual secret service that made the movement invincible. The radical pacifist, a secret philosophy. Before he met a young, 26-year-old preacher named Martin Luther King Jr., Bayard Rustin was already a seasoned revolutionary. He was a Quaker, a former communist, and a protege of Philip Randolph. But his most dangerous secret was his education in global resistance. In 1948, Rustin traveled to India to study the techniques of Mahatma Gandhi. He didn't just read about nonviolence. He lived Italiano. He realized that nonviolence wasn't just being nice or not fighting back. It was strategic provocation. It was a way to use the enemy's own strength against them, a political juju. When Rustin first arrived in Montgomery to help with the bus boycott, he walked into Dr. King's house and was shocked. There were guns everywhere. King's supporters were sitting on the porch with rifles, ready for a shootout. Rustin famously told King, "If you want to use the weapon of peace, you cannot have a pistol on your nightstand." He spent nights in secret meetings, coaching King on the philosophy of ahimsa, total nonviolence. He turned a local protest into a moral crusade that the world couldn't look away from. The FBI's secret weapon, the Lavender Scare. Why was Rustin kept in the shadows? Because Bayard Rustin was an openly gay man in an era where being gay was not just a social taboo, it was a crime. J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI knew this. They saw Rustin as the weak link they could use to destroy Dr. King. The secret files of the FBI were filled with surveillance on Rustin. In 1963, as the March on Washington was being planned, Senator Strom Thurmond stood on the floor of the U.S. Senate and attacked Rustin. Kalin, Imacomines, draft dodger, and homosexual. The goal was to spark a scandal that would force King to fire him. The pressure from within the movement was just as intense. Other black leaders, fearing the backlash, told King, "Rustin has to go. He's a liability." For a time, King did distance himself from Rustin. It is one of the most painful secrets of the movement, that even within a fight for justice, prejudice forced a genius into the closet of history. But when the March on Washington needed a logistical mastermind, King knew there was only one man who could do the impossible. The logistics of a revolution. How to move 250,000 people. The 1963 March on Washington is remembered for the "I Have a Dream" speech. But the secret of its success was the math. Bayard Rustin had only 8 weeks to organize the largest demonstration in American history. There were no cell phones, no internet, no Google Maps. Rustin set up a war room in a small office in Harlem. He didn't just invite people, he engineered their arrival. The bus secret. He calculated exactly how many buses could fit through the Holland Tunnel per hour. The food secret. He organized the preparation of 80,000 Freedom Meal Kits, cheese sandwiches and apples, so people wouldn't have to rely on segregated restaurants. The sound secret. He spent a fortune on the most advanced sound system available, knowing that if the crowd couldn't hear the speakers, they might become restless or violent. The police secret. He trained a private, non-violent security force of 2,000 off-duty black police officers and firemen to ensure that if any agitators started trouble, the movement would handle it internally without giving the real police an excuse to attack. Rustin was a chain smoker with a brilliant, musical voice and an obsession with detail. He slept 4 hours a night. He was the ghost in the machine, making sure that when 250,000 people showed up, it looked like a peaceful, inevitable wave of humanity, rather than a chaotic mob. The master of the tape. Rustin understood something that many leaders today forget. Media control. He knew that if the march was peaceful, the headlines would have to focus on the demands for justice. He meticulously scripted the order of speakers. He made sure the celebrities like Sidney Poitier, Harry Belafonte, and Marlon Brando were positioned where the cameras could see them. The secret goal of the march wasn't just to talk to the government. It was to talk to the white families sitting in their living rooms in Ohio and California. Rustin turned the Lincoln Memorial into a stage, and he was the ultimate stage manager. He ensured that the imagery of black and white people holding hands was the viral content of 1963. The erasure and the return. After the march, when Life magazine put the organizers on its cover, Rustin was their butt, often cropped out or relegated to the fine print. He spent the rest of his life working for labor rights and refugee causes, but he remained a hush-hush figure in the civil rights narrative. The secret of Bayard Rustin is a reminder that the movement was a big tent. It included socialists, pacifists, religious leaders, and people the mainstream society wasn't ready to accept. Rustin didn't mind being a ghost. Yusef, Dosai. We need, in every community, a group of angelic troublemakers. He was the chief angelic troublemaker. He proved that you don't need to be the face of a movement to be its heart. He showed that brilliance and strategy could overcome even the most deep-seated prejudices. If it took 50 years for the world to finally say his name. Why we must remember the ghost. Today, as we look at modern movements, we see the blueprint Rustin created. Every time a protest uses a specific hashtag, organizes a peaceful sit-in, or uses optics to gain sympathy, they are using the Rustin method. The secret of the March on Washington wasn't that it happened, it's that it worked. And it worked because a man who was told he didn't belong. Because of who he was built, the very platform that allowed everyone else to belong. By the spring of 1963, the Civil Rights Movement was dying. It's a secret many historians don't like to admit. In Birmingham, Alabama, the most segregated city in America, the movement had hit a brick wall. Dr. King and the SCLC were running out of money, volunteers, and momentum. Their efforts seemed to be stalling. Adults were terrified, and for a good reason. Black parents protesting faced arrest, job loss, foreclosures, and even firebombed homes. The risks were immense. The movement was bankrupt of people willing to go to jail. A critical shortage of participants emerged. Then, James Bevel, a top lieutenant to Dr. King, proposed a radical, secret plan. Even King's advisors thought it insane. He called it Project C, for confrontation. But the secret weapon wasn't men or women. It was going to be the children. The secret recruitment. The D-Day plan. James Bevel secretly visited Birmingham schools. He didn't tell parents, instead meeting student leaders, athletes, and choir members. He challenged them. Your parents can't march. They have bills, but you. No job to lose. You have the power to break this city. He organized secret workshops at the 16th Street Baptist Church. Under the guise of youth choir practice or social mixers, Bevel and his team trained kids as young as 7 or 8. They were trained in the art of nonviolent warfare, the flinch test, Trainers would scream in their faces, spit on them, and push them to see if they would react. If a child fought back, they weren't allowed to march. The jail prep. They taught the kids what to expect. They turned going to jail into a badge of honor, a rite of passage. The kids even developed a secret code. They called the day of the protest D-Day. They used the local black radio station, WENN, to spread the word. The DJ, Tall Paul Porter, would broadcast secret messages. There's going to be a party at the park. Bring your toothbrushes, which was code for, we're going to jail today. May 2nd, 1963, the dam breaks. Thousands of students cut class. They converged on the 16th Street Baptist Church, singing, "We Shall Overcome." The Commissioner of Public Safety in Birmingham was Eugene Bull Connor, a fierce segregationist with a short fuse. He was exactly who the movement wanted to trigger. When the first wave of 50 kids walked out, Connor arrested them, then another 50, then another. By the end of the first day, over 600 children were in jail. They were laughing, singing, and waving from the windows of school buses, being used as temporary paddy wagons. The secret was working. The police were becoming overwhelmed. There wasn't enough room in the jails to hold the youth of Birmingham. The brutal secret, why the hoses were necessary. The next day, May 3rd, is the day that changed the world. Bull Connor had run out of jail space, so he decided to use force to stop the children from reaching City Hall. He brought out the canine units and the high-pressure fire hoses. This is the darkest secret of the strategy. The movement leaders knew Bull Connor would react with violence. They needed him to. They knew that a photo of a man being hit with a hose was one thing, but a photo of a 10-year-old girl in a sundress being blasted into a brick wall by water pressure that could strip bark off a tree, that would be an image the world could never forget. As the hoses were turned on, the Monitor 9 monitors were so powerful, they knocked the children's clothes off and tumbled them down the street like police dogs were set loose, lunging at teenagers. The media trap. While this was happening, James Bovell and the other organizers were doing something very specific. They were positioning the cameras. They made sure the NBC and CBS reporters had the best angles. The secret of the Children's Crusade was that it was a media trap. By using children, the movement shifted the narrative from a legal dispute to a moral atrocity. When those images hit the front pages, the pressure on the White House became unbearable. President John F. Kennedy famously said, "The events in Birmingham have so increased the cries for equality that no city or state can prudently choose to ignore them." Malcolm X famously criticized the move, saying, "Real men don't put their children on the firing line." Even some in the NAACP called the tactic irresponsible. King held a secret meeting with the parents of the arrested children. He told them, "Don't worry about your children. They are the ones who are truly free." But the secret guilt remained. If one of those children had been killed, the movement would have been blamed for their blood. It was a massive, terrifying gamble. The gamble, however, paid off. Within days, the business leaders of Birmingham seen their city's reputation destroyed. The Children's Crusade had done in 5 days what the adults hadn't been able to do in 5 years. The psychological shift. The secret legacy of this event wasn't just the change in laws. It was the change in the black community's psyche. For the first time, the fear of the white man was broken. If an 8-year-old could face a German shepherd in a fire hose, then a 40-year-old could surely stand in line to register to vote. The kids who marched in 1963 became the leaders of the 1970s and 80s. They learned a secret that the world tried to hide from them. Power is not something you are given, it is something you take. They proved that even the most powerless members of Société Civile could bring a superpower to its knees, if they were organized and brave enough. The cost of the secret. We must also acknowledge the secret trauma. Many of the children who were hosed and bitten never talked about it for decades. They carried the scars both physical and emotionally into their adult lives. Te Werite, infantry of the dream, and they paid a price that is rarely mentioned in the upbeat summaries of the Civil Rights Movement. The Children's Crusade remains the most extreme example of the secret strategy. It was the moment the movement stopped playing by the rules of the old world and started writing its own, using the innocence of youth to expose the ugliness of hate. When we think of the Civil Rights Movement, we hear the booming baritone of Dr. King or the fiery rhetoric of Malcolm X. But the most dangerous secret of the movement is that it would have collapsed in less than a week without a sophisticated underground network of women. These women didn't just support the movement. They engineered it from their kitchens, their classrooms, and their church pews. We're told Rosa Parks sat down, and the next day, the Montgomery bus boycott magically began at Eastman. The reality is a high-stakes midnight run led by Joanne Robinson, a professor at Alabama State College. Robinson had been humiliated on a bus years earlier and had been secretly planning a boycott ever since. The moment she heard of Rosa Parks' arrest, she didn't wait for the men to meet. She and 2 of her students sneaked into the college's mimeograph room in the middle of the night. They worked until dawn, secretly printing 35,000 flyers on their own dime. Morning. They had organized a secret distribution network of block captains, mostly women who hand-delivered those flyers to every black home in Montgomery. By the time the male preachers met to discuss if they should boycott, the women had already made it a reality. Robinson was the secret architect of the boycott's first 24 hours. How do you fund a year-long boycott when your people are poor and the banks won't lend you a cent? You cook. Georgia Gilmore was a powerhouse who lost her job for participating in the boycott. In response, she started a secret organization called the Club from Nowhere. The name was a secret code. If anyone asked where the money came from, the answer was no F. She organized a network of black women who baked pies, fried chicken, and made sandwiches to sell to the very people boycotting the buses. They funneled every penny of profit into the Montgomery Improvement Association to pay for gas, tires, and new cars for the carpool system. Georgia's kitchen became a secret treasury. Even Dr. King would sneak into her house through the back door to eat and hold strategy meetings, knowing the police would never think to look for the brain trust of the movement in a woman's kitchen. The most effective way to keep a population enslaved is to keep them illiterate. In the Jim Crow South, literacy tests were the secret weapon used to stop black people from voting. These tests were designed to be impossible, asking people to interpret obscure sections of the state constitution or count a number of bubbles in a bar of soap. Septima Clark, often called the mother of the movement, realized that mushes wouldn't work if people couldn't vote. She created citizenship schools in secret because it was dangerous to teach black people their rights. These schools were often disguised as sewing circles or Bible studies. Clark taught people how to read and write using the U.S. Constitution as a textbook. She was a secret educator, turning sharecroppers into political activists. By the time she was done, she had trained over 10,000 teachers who went into the deepest parts of the South to build a secret army of informed voters. Dr. King himself said, "I am a product of the work of Septima Clark. If there is one name that should be as famous as King's, it is Ella Baker." She was the secret general who hated the spotlight. She believed in group-centered leadership rather than leader-centered groups. Baker was the one who looked at the students' hip needs in 1960 and saw a revolution, where the older men saw distraction. She secretly organized a meeting at Shaw University that birthed SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. She was a secret mentor to the youth. She taught them how to organize grassroots power going door-to-door in the most dangerous parts of Mississippi where the KKK was most active. She was the one who told the students, "You don't need a leader to tell you when to be free." Without Ella Baker's secret influence, the movement would have stayed in the churches and never reached the streets. The most untold secret of the movement is the sheer physical violence women endured. Fannie Lou Hamer was a sharecropper who didn't know she had the right to vote until she was 44. In jail, she was secretly beaten so badly by 2 black inmates forced by white guards that she suffered permanent kidney damage and a limp for the rest of her life. But when she stood before the Democratic National Convention in 1964, she didn't talk about her pain. She talked about her power. Her secret was her voice. She sang hymns to keep the protesters' spirits up in the darkest jail cells. She was the spirit of the movement, the woman who proved that you could break a person's body, but you could never break their secret will. While the men were marching, Dorothy Height, president of the National Council of Negro Women, was running a secret intelligence operation. She organized Wednesdays in Mississippi where interracial teams of northern women would travel to the south in secret. These women, black and white, together would meet in living rooms to bridge the gap between the two worlds. The white women would go to the white neighborhoods to talk sense to the wives of the local officials, while the black women would provide the boots-on-the-ground intelligence. It was a secret sisterhood that provided a buffer against the violence of the state. Why are these stories secrets? Because at the time, the media and the government were obsessed with the great man theory of history. They wanted a single face to put on the cover of Time magazine. But the movement was a hydra. If you cut off one male head, 10 more female heads were already organized and ready to lead. The women of the movement knew that for the movement to survive, it had to be leaderless and everywhere at once. They traded the glory of the podium for the effectiveness of the shadows. They were the ones who wrote the speeches, raised the children, cooked the food, funded the cars, and taught the classes. As we conclude this story of the untold events, remember, Tees, the Civil Rights Movement didn't just happen because of a few I have a dream moments. It happened because thousands of women decided that their kitchens were war rooms, their sewing circles were secret societies, and their voices were the true sound of freedom. America was changed not by the people we expected, but by the people history tried to ignore. From the 15-year-old girl on the bus to the gay architect in the shadows. From the veterans with the double V to the children on the front lines and the women in the secret kitchens. The Civil Rights Movement was a masterpiece of hidden strategy. The dream was never a solo. It was a symphony played by people who were willing to be invisible so that the truth could finally be seen.